Welcome to the Martin Museum. We built this museum about 8 years ago, and it's been a wonderful way to showcase our history and some of the old instruments that we have. And of course, we encourage everybody from Singapore to come and visit us at some point. You're welcome to see all of this. Our story, which is really, really fascinating, and a story about a man with a passion, starts here in Maastricht, which was in Saxony. If you know where Prague is, it's about 2.5 hours west of Prague. And this young boy from a woodworking family went to his father one day and said, "I'd like to build guitars." And his father encouraged him to pursue that passion. He sent him off to Vienna to study with Johann Stauffer. Stauffer was in Vienna building guitars for a number of years, but the whole guitar thing was relatively new. The size, the shape, and the tuning were somewhat new in the late 1800s. So he goes off to Vienna, he studies with Stauffer, ends up being in Stauffer's shop for 14 years, and becomes Stauffer's foreman. And then later develops a partnership with Karl Kuhl, and they're building instruments together. While he's with Karl Kuhl, he marries Kuhl's daughter, Ottilie, and he and Ottilie, she gets pregnant. They decide to move back to Maastricht and open up a guitar shop. When they move back, they're met with a little resistance from the violin and the cabinet makers guild. And because he did not apprentice in Maastricht, he was exercised by the rest of the woodworkers there, and got into a little battle. They actually took this to court. He won the court case, but he kind of lost the battle, and he was a little disenchanted with what was happening there in Germany. So he decided to move his family to the New World, and they come over to New York City and open up a shop in New York. And this is a very, very different environment. So if we take a look back at the picture of Maastricht, rolling hills, tiny little village, and then we come over and we look at New York City, which is much smaller than it is today, but it was still a lot of people all in one place. This is a great rendering because it shows that there were actually animals in the streets. The roads were still dirt. The sewer system wasn't intact. And it was a little bit uncomfortable for them moving from Germany to New York. But they hung out there for a couple of years. His wife, Ottilie, was less than enthused with New York, as we mentioned, and she was corresponding with a friend who lived in Nazareth. That friend convinced her to come to Nazareth for a visit and see what it was like. So when she comes down here to visit, she finds Maastricht. She finds the same rolling hills and similar environment and people who speak German here in Maastricht. So it's very comfortable. They decide to move down here in 1839, and they set up a shop in Cherry Hill. So Cherry Hill is right up the street from the Martin factory, literally walking distance. And from 1839 to 1859, this is where CF builds instruments. One of the most significant inventions of that time was X-bracing. So he was building guitars that he had learned about in Vienna. So there was a Viennese-style guitar, and there was a Spanish-style guitar. The Viennese instruments had a pin bridge, and that's the bridge style that he wanted to use. However, the bracing system was usually fan bracing, the Spanish-style system. And when you have the fans underneath the bridge and you start drilling holes through the bridge, the chance that you might hit one of those braces was pretty significant. So he started taking the fans and slowly moving them out of the way of the bridge plate, and eventually ended up with this pattern that we see here on this top. This guitar that you see below is the first known X-brace guitar. It was built in 1842 for this artist named Madame de Goni. And she was a traveling musician. She had come to visit the Martin factory. CF had already been evolving his X-bracing, and she was the first one to order a guitar with X-bracing on it. You can see that these old parlor guitars are generally very small. They were designated with a number, sometimes an O. This down here is a size 2, and the 34 in the suffix was the appointment style, and also the price. So it was a size 2 guitar with 34 appointments, and it was $34 US. CF also made a number of instruments. He was a really, really good woodworker. Again, his father was a cabinet maker and furniture builder, so he had a lot of skill even before he got into guitar building. And people would often ask him to make instruments that were from the old world, from Europe, that they couldn't get yet in the United States. And so he would build them. This is an example of a zither that he built around 1880. Also interesting to note that the primary audience for the guitar, similar to Madame Bigoni, was a woman. A lot of these guitars were used as a form of entertainment in the parlor, hence the name of the instruments, and very, very different makeup today, where women make up about 11% of the guitar market here in the US. This is a museum depiction of North Street, and you either have seen or will see some of the footage from North Street. We gave City Music a sneak peek of the building over there, but we can see over here some of the old tools and fixtures that were used. This toolbox up here was brought over from Germany by CF. So when he got on the schooner and traveled to New York City, that's the toolbox that he brought. The other piece we see over here are some of the wheels that were used for the pulley system that would use the power from a steam engine to control the machinery. So there were leather belts that went around these wheels, and those would move through the factory, and that's how they would engage all the machinery. This is a nice picture of C.F. Martin III. This is Chris's grandfather, and probably the most significant influence on Chris's life and his getting into the business of Martin guitar. I'm going to take you over here and show you a part of Martin history that is maybe not as well known. We made a lot of mandolins back in the early part of the 1900s. I'm going to pull this one down because it's a special instrument. This particular mandolin is the mandolin that we see pictured here with Herbert Keller. And he and his brother, C.F. III, would travel around and play. They would do essentially Martin clinics or Martin experience. So this is a beautiful mandolin with pearl appointments, ivory tuning pegs and bridge. And if we look at the back, these are all individual pieces of Brazilian rosewood and ivory that have been inlaid together in that bowl back design. Beautiful instruments, but not something that we're producing today. These were primarily inspired by the Italian immigration. So a lot of Italians were moving into the U.S., and this was an instrument that they wanted to buy, and they really appreciated the lavish appointments. Fortunately, even though the mandolin didn't stay for Martin, the idea of that appointment style carries over into the 45 design that we see a little bit later. The Martin ukulele, one of our most popular instruments. It's gone through some ups and downs as far as popularity. Back in around the same time as the mandolin, but the late 19-teens into the 1920s, the ukulele became very, very popular. A little instrument that actually came from a little island off of Portugal called Madeira. The Madeirans had taken this instrument. They had gone out whaling and fishing and found their way in the Polynesian islands and left the instrument there, and the Hawaiians really took to it and developed it into something really interesting. There was a fair in San Francisco where the feature was Hawaii, and people have just gone crazy for anything Hawaiian in the U.S. So ukuleles were doing extremely well. We can see here next to this photo, in 1926, we were making 14,000 ukuleles, and at that time, the records show that we only made about 700 to 800 guitars. So a lot of ukuleles were being built and less guitars during the Depression era. The guitars that come next are now starting to grow. They're getting a little bit bigger, and music is getting more popular. The guitar is getting more popular. There are ensembles that are traveling through the U.S., and one of the instruments in those ensembles was a banjo. So there was now a need for the guitar to get out of the parlor size and become a little bit larger to be able to compete with the banjo. So we see guitars go from the two sizes to now we start seeing single O, double O, and very soon we'll see triple O as well. If you have noticed, we haven't seen a Martin logo on any of these instruments, and we won't see that until about 1931. The instruments would have the Martin name on the inside. They would often say CF Martin, New York, even though they were built in Nazareth. It was a great marketing ploy. Everybody knew where New York was. Not everybody knew about Nazareth yet. So there were opportunities for other entities to sell instruments. And a lot of the instruments that we see over here were made for the Oliver Ditson Company. It was a publishing house out of Boston. And we also made instruments for Wurlitzer, and we made some artist instruments, like this one here. This was an Olcott Bickford artist model guitar, very early. So this is from 1921. But the Ditson Company was significant because it was a very large catalog company, and they had a lot of influence on design. So with the help of Ditson and our shop foreman, John Dykeman, there were a lot of blueprints being made and people talking about the shape of the guitar, and there was a noticeable need for the guitar to get even larger than it was today. So when we go into the next section, we'll see the first dreadnoughts. We move over here, and before we go into the next section, we should stop here and take a look at the 1 millionth guitar. This is serial number 1 million, and it was built in 2004. It's a beautiful, beautiful instrument with exquisite pearl inlay. There are gems, diamonds, and rubies, a little bit of everything on this guitar. Along with the millionth guitar, there were 50 guitars called the D100. Unfortunately, they have just sold out, but there were 50 guitars after this serial number that were replicas of this, and they were priced at $115,000 as the list price. We move over into a new era, and we start to see guitar shapes that are more familiar to us. So we now see the OM shape, which is also the same body size as the triple O. And there's a guitar here that is very interesting. I'm going to get this one out to show you. This is an OM 45 Deluxe. So we just replicated this guitar last year. Beautiful Brazilian rosewood. This guitar was made in 1930 and was only one of 11 instruments that were made in that year of that body style and appointment style. This guitar was purchased at auction last year for about $380,000. You can see the beautiful banjo-style tuners on the back. These are not the original tuners. It's the only thing that's not original on this guitar, but they're a close replica. So that's one of the latest guitars in the Authentic series that we've produced. So now most of the instruments that we're looking at are at least double O, if not triple O size. And we move a little bit further in history, which we go right before 1931, but in 1929 we created the first dreadnought. Now this is called the Ditson style dreadnought because it was produced specifically for the Ditson Company. But again, we had a lot of influence in the design, and the idea of calling it a dreadnought is very significant too. Mr. Martin had a lot of interest in British naval history, and in the British fleet there was a ship called the HMS Dreadnought, and it had that name because it was big and thunderous, and he thought that was a fitting name for this guitar because this was a big, bassy, thunderous sounding instrument. So it's still a 12-fret guitar, so the body looks a little bit longer than what we're used to as a standard dreadnought. But as we move forward a little bit, we start to see the change to 14th fret. So that initially happened on the OMs, but we now see it on the dreadnoughts, and this has become the standard for what we know as a dreadnought today. And there's a couple of particular instruments here that are interesting. The D45, where we saw D45 being pearled in manufacturing. This is a beautiful, beautiful guitar. This is from 1942. It's considered a pre-war D45. And this is one of 91 instruments that were produced at that time. And we'll take this one out and show you. But a phenomenal guitar, beautiful Brazilian rosewood, all original. This is a guitar that people would like to play on a record, which is part of why its value is so significant. So in the Retro series, there's a D45E Retro, and all of the images from those guitars came from museum pieces or guitars that were loaned to us. This is the actual guitar that the sound images for the D45E Retro came from. So this guitar was recorded to get those sounds. Another instrument up here that's interesting is the first D28, the first one that had a D28 stamp on it. Again, it's still a 12-fret instrument, so an elongated body. And this particular guitar came from the collection of Richard Gere, the actor, also a very good guitar player. And he had a number of instruments. This is one that he auctioned off, and because it was the first D28, it was something important for us to have in the museum. Move over here and take a look at the F series. This is one of our attempts to enter the electric guitar world early on. These instruments were all made in the early to mid and even into the 1940s a little bit. These are less valuable because they're not as practical. So when we talk about the D45, that's an instrument that people would love to play, something you might hear on a record. The F-Series guitars were great and they're valuable because they're old, but they're not as valuable because they were not as practical. So there's probably other instruments that would be played on a record today, a D'Angelico or something to that effect. And one of the problems with the archtops was that we were so used to making flat guitars. We knew that they were archtop guitars and they had to have an archtop, but we made the backs flat, and that's what made them a little bit less desirable. The other issue with the archtop guitars is that during wartime, the military would use all of the metal production and a lot of spruce as well for airplanes. Airplane wings were made out of spruce at the time. And an archtop would take a 3-inch slab of wood to be able to carve out the arch from. A flat top guitar, you could get many more tops out of that 3-inch slab. So it was important as a business decision to make the guitars that we're going to sell during those times, and we focused more on making the flat top guitars. Some Hawaiian guitars. These are guitars that were played on the lap using a little bar. There's some examples down here. And it's very rare to see these in this condition. They were essentially the same exact guitar. So for example, this is an 017. The H just meant that it was a Hawaiian guitar. So it had a higher bridge and a higher nut on it, bringing the action up to make it accessible to slide playing. Most of these guitars have been converted back to just an 017 or whatever the model was. This is a rare one here. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but it was very very unlikely to see anything painted or sunburst coming out of the Martin factory, with the exception of the archtop guitars, which is not something that we did. We were surprised when somebody walked through our front door with this guitar and said, I have a Martin guitar, Martin tenor, that I think is original. And when we went back and looked at the ledger, indeed it says in there, white. So it's a very, very rare painted Martin guitar from early on. Next, we'll take a step into the Chris Martin collection. And this is an interesting room because not everything in here has to do with guitars. This was it's important to know not just about our instruments, but who the company is. And a big part of who Chris is he's somebody who likes to travel, and he likes to collect things from around the world. So we see a number of pieces of folk art all around here. We also see a number of interesting guitars, and not all of them are Martins. There's a Regal Custom, a 1936 custom guitar here that he purchased at an auction just because he thought it was an interesting guitar. The guitar up in the corner, the 518, was Chris's first guitar, and he's actually featured in this book down below called My First Guitar, down here. So he's very proud to be in there, because if you probably can't see in the video, but some of the names on this book are Jimmy Page, Les Paul, Alex Lifeson, Pat Metheny, Joe Satriani. So some very famous guitar players featured in that book. This instrument right here is interesting because, as we talked about earlier in the family history, they were kind of forbidden from building guitars in Germany. It wasn't a popular instrument. People were either building cabinets or violins, and he left Marschallkirchen for that reason and came to New York City. When Chris went back to Cologne in the 80s, he saw a guitar maker in Cologne who was showcasing guitars that were built in Marschallkirchen, and he thought it was amazing that somebody was able to finally make guitars in his family's hometown. So he thought that would be an interesting piece to bring back to the museum. A lot of other interesting artifacts from all over the world. Folk art, pictures that people have donated to Chris. There's some renderings in here. This is one of the pencil drawings, or pen and ink drawings, that Dick Boak did. Dick Boak is our company archivist and had put a lot of this museum together. Nice embroidered case on a guitar over here, and of course the Claire guitar. So Claire Frances Martin was born in 2005, and as soon as she was born, there were some guitars that were made for her. We come back out into the museum collection and we enter some new styles of music. And previously, Andres Segovia had come into the U.S. and had created a lot of excitement about the guitar, but of course it was a different style of playing, and he played a Spanish guitar and talked about that quite a bit. The bluegrass players, the flat pickers, virtuosic guitar players, many of them are just incredible. Not something that everybody could grasp. So coming off the heels of Segovia and bluegrass, there was a lot of music out there that was very interesting, but it was very intricate. It took the folk era, groups like the Kingston Trio, to really change that. So when the Kingston Trio came along, it created a whole new popularity in music, and now they were playing very simple 3-chord songs. Good songs, but they were simple, and now people who previously said, I like guitar, but I don't think I can do it, were now saying, I think I could play guitar. So that changed the game, and we went from manufacturing guitars in the old factory at North Street to suddenly needing a new facility. We went to a trade show, and we took home orders for 4.5 years and didn't know how we were going to build them. So in probably late 1963, we started building the property that we're on now. So the factory tour and the museum are on the Sycamore Street property. That property opened in the fall of 1964. There was the groundbreaking shovel, and that's when we started producing instruments over here at North Street. A couple of instruments here. This is an era where things are starting to be electrified. We're moving away from the microphone, and people are looking for pickups and guitars. Some of these early pickups were made by a company called DeArmond, and we started installing them in stock models. So over here on the left we have a D28E, and that's from 1965, and then in the middle we have a 0018E. So these were the same as their stock models, but they had electronics built into them. This guitar below has an interesting story, and I'll open up this case for us to take a look at this one. This guitar was owned by a prolific folk singer and writer named Mary Lou Lord, and she had given this guitar to her boyfriend, and her boyfriend loved the guitar. It was pretty old when he got it. He named it Grandpa because it was so old, but he absolutely loved this instrument. He wrote a lot of music on it. And later on, right before he was about to go on MTV Unplugged, he was dating a new woman, and her name was Courtney Love. And Courtney said to Kurt Cobain, she said, "Where did you get that guitar?" And Kurt's response was, "I got the guitar from my other girlfriend." So Courtney didn't like that story and made him give the guitar back. So he gave the guitar back to Mary Lou Lord. She was so distraught with the whole story that she sold it to a store, I believe in Colorado, and they called us and asked us if we wanted it for the museum. So Kurt never played this actual guitar on MTV, but this is the guitar that he wrote a lot of music on. And then, of course, later on, I think in 1994, Courtney Love got her chance to go on MTV Unplugged. And Dick Boak was driving guitars up to New York City for the taping of MTV. He brought this guitar up at request. Courtney Love got in a little lover's quarrel with her guitar player, and she smashed this guitar on stage during the live taping. So this is how it came back to us, with the cracks, and the battery fell out, the electronics fell out. The guitar was a mess. So it stayed exactly that way. So now music is really booming. We get into the 60s and the 70s, and some of the most prolific writing that has ever occurred on an acoustic guitar. We see artists from Jim Croce and Roger McGuinn, Don McLean, Arlo Guthrie. We get into the Crosby, Stills, and Nash area. These are all artists who were playing and writing on Martin guitars. Most of the instruments that you're looking at here are guitars that were commemorative editions. And the interesting thing about this program is that the proceeds from the guitar, rather than going to the artist selects a charity for those items to go to. So Eric Clapton is a great example. We've done a number of guitars with Eric Clapton, and he's donated his portion of those proceeds towards a children's charity. Same thing with Ed Sheeran, a newer artist, doing something similar. All the proceeds from the Ed Sheeran guitars go towards a children's hospice that he supports. So we have the David Crosby, the Graham Nash, and the Stephen Stills. They all did a guitar with us. Paul Simon guitar, Joan Baez, Gordon Lightfoot. So lots of interesting music happening, and then things change a little bit. So now we're getting into the late 70s. We start to get into the 80s. So we have the things like the Yamaha DX7 were starting to come into the market, and people's idea of music was changing. People were excited about this new technology, and they were starting to use keyboards and sequencers. And then a form of music happens. Get into the disco era, and that changes things too. So there weren't a whole lot of acoustic guitars being used in the disco era, or in the late 70s and 80s in general. So our business really changed as music changed, and it was a time when it really hurt the company. It was a very difficult time. So in the middle of all this expansion, the company was doing very well up until, again, when the keyboard and the disco era happened. And it was a time when it was very popular to acquire other things. So Chris's father wanted to expand the business significantly and purchased a lot of music-related things, a drumstick company, a drum company. We owned Vega Banjo, Goya, Sigma, Levin, all other guitar brands. Some of the interesting things that were non-guitar related were the race car team. We actually owned a basketball team, veterinary software design company, among other things. Now, the one acquisition that really, really made sense and stuck with us for a long time was the acquisition of the Darko String Company. So we see that listed there. And the Darko String Company was purchased from the D'Addario family. And of course, we're familiar with D'Addario strings and Planet Waves accessories, so they really came back. So they had decided not to produce strings for a little while, and after we purchased Darko, a number of years later, they decided to come back and start producing strings again as the D'Addario family. So the Darko String Company later became the Martin String Company as it moved from Long Island down to Nazareth. It was difficult for us to manage a business here in Nazareth and also another in New York, about almost 2 hours away. So it made sense to bring it down here. We changed it to the Martin String Company, and we've been producing our own strings ever since. So we continue on this side with some more artist models and commemorative editions for things such as the Grand Ole Opry, beautiful guitar that was done there. Strong relationship with the Fishman Company, and we actually sort of helped launch Fishman about 32 years ago. Our engineer at the time, John Marshall, was looking for a new pickup system. He heard about Larry Fishman building transducers for upright basses. He literally drove up to Massachusetts, spent a week in Larry's garage, and the two of them came up with the undersaddle thin line pickup that we see here. So we've been using Fishman items ever since. Johnny Cash. So as I mentioned earlier, not a whole lot of painting of guitars and sunbursting. It's widely known that sunbursting is generally used to hide imperfections in the wood or the wide grain on the outside. It's become a beautiful guitar design and something that we use today. But traditionally, we didn't paint or sunburst. When Johnny Cash, the man in black, came to us and asked for a black guitar, somebody got excited and took the order. As the guitar was going through manufacturing, Chris's grandfather was less than thrilled. Until a couple months later, he saw Johnny Cash and this guitar being played on the TV show Columbo. So it happened to be one of his favorite TV shows. He's watching an episode and he sees a Martin guitar, and he was suddenly okay with that. You can also see the dollar bill that Johnny used, usually up on the frets to kind of create a rhythmic, muted pattern while he was playing. A replica of the Willie Nelson guitar down here. Willie Nelson's guitar is called Trigger. Of course, we couldn't replicate the extra sound hole that he created over the years from strumming it with a pick. And then over here we see Sting and a whole conversation about sustainability. So the acquisition of wood has become something very difficult and something that we pay a lot of attention to and spend a lot of time recognizing. We've helped develop some organizations that work with different governing wood organizations to help people understand the need for proper wood harvesting techniques and replenishing. Of course, Eric Clapton, when he went on MTV Unplugged, it really changed everything for us. That was a form of marketing that we wouldn't have been able to touch, would have been too expensive for us at the time, especially. And he went on that TV show and literally changed our business. Took us from, almost, maybe making a couple thousand guitars a year to literally everybody wanted an acoustic guitar, and it really changed music. On the other side is a little string display, and also some examples and some video of what happens in Navajoa, Mexico. That's where we have our sister plant. We've been down there for, I believe we're in our 26th year, and the number of the people working there have been there that whole time. So we have a lot of confidence in their build down there. All of the products and materials come from or are engineered here and then assembled and produced in Mexico. And over here we get into an interesting display. We talk about Sycamore Street, which is the building we're in now. We see an early rendering of what that looked like in 1964. Some of the people that are working here, what a workbench looked like. Also, as we were producing the F-Series guitars and the GT Series guitars, those were electric instruments, we started producing Martin amplifiers. So this is something that not a lot of people know about. This is a Martin SS-140, so SS was solid state, and the amplifiers were built for us by the Allen Organ Company, which is a world-famous organ company in Macungie, Pennsylvania. So they're only about 15 miles from here. So it was a good partnership with them because they were doing really well with electronics. And another little piece I want to point out down here is there's a pencil with a copper tube. You can see a very short pencil. That pencil would be very uncomfortable to write with in that size. But again, during wartime especially, but the Martin family was very, very frugal and pulled us through some difficult economic times. When war would occur, either the metal, the wood, or things like graphite would become very scarce. So one day, CF walked around and gave everybody the copper tubes and asked them to put these on the end of their pencils to help use the graphite as long as they could. And it was a great idea. Later on, somebody, after the war was over and there was less of a ration on graphite, somebody gave CF a box of pencils for Christmas. And we talked a little bit earlier and saw some of the people in the factory. Been a lot of families who have worked here. There's a picture here of Frank Werkheiser. And if we could look at the Werkheiser family tree of people that worked at Martin, it would take a whole sheet of paper. So there are a number of people here, not with the Werkheiser name, but people who married into the family and still are there. So I didn't know Frank, but I worked with, I believe it was his brother or nephew, Paul Werkheiser, who was here for a number of years. Wonderful gentleman who retired about 8 years ago. And of course, the celebration of the D50, 50 years ago, and 1965 is very important in your history, and it's also very important in our history. So 50 years ago, a number of great things happened, and one small part of that was the D35. And the D35 was initially created out of necessity. So as wood became, or Brazilian rosewood became less and less available, there were smaller pieces of wood that we could use. And the idea was that you could create an instrument using 3 panels of wood rather than 2. And that's where the 35 design came from. As you can see over the years, it has translated into so many different designs and ideas, and using contrasting woods to create an interesting effect. There's a nice picture of some artists playing D35s down here. There's Bruce Springsteen on his 1978 tour, playing a D35, possibly writing some new songs while in the rehearsal stages. And up here we see the D45 Peacock. This was built in 1999, and it was serial number 750,000. So every significant serial number stage we'll do an intricate guitar for. This is the D100. This is the replica of the millionth guitar that we saw earlier. And again, there were only 50 of these guitars made.